Ancestral healing, it's a part of your journey that you displayed early on in your public career, your own personal healing. And so all these years later, in this current time, how has the work of ancestral healing shifted or even maybe gained some more importance?
Right now, when you look at the macrocosmic picture of humanity and the trouble that humanity is getting itself into and the direction that it's headed, which is, trust me, right now, not a good direction, a lot of that is backed by these ancestral patterns, which just keep continuing for generation after generation. People who study, human patterns throughout history will be the first to tell you that cycles are repeating. They're the first, when huge political things happen, to be like, wait, this is just like the 1930s, So it doesn't take a genius to look at those repetitive patterns, but very few people look at those repetitive patterns through the lens of it being ancestral trauma, in fact. It's things that people went through far before our time that they have not died, they have not been resolved, they have not been transmuted. They're just being repeated. It's just, now this is that, but version 2020, And so right now we're being called, so as to not repeat the cycle again, to become aware of these ancestral patterns within each one of us so that we stop feeding momentum into those detrimental patterns and instead to shift those patterns so that we're benefiting the trajectory of our personal family line, which on a macrocosmic level means that we're progressing on the totality of humanity.
Therefore, would it be appropriate to also consider this descendant healing? Because I feel like in the work and in the spiritual ways right now, indigenosity is very like in the forefront, you could say. And then people looking at their ancestors and doing the deep ancestral healing, but not holding in the forefront of the awareness, like, why are we doing this? Who are we doing this for? Are we really trying to heal 3 grandmas back? No, it's for my daughter who's here right now. It's for
exactly.
her. It's for
Yep.
I guess I would say in the land of service, it's actually not even for me. I'm a hollow vessel in this equation. And so maybe putting some, okay. Let me know what you think about that. But like putting more of the emphasis on who we're doing it for and the why, because a lot of people get stuck in the work too, where it's just like never ending, right?
Oh, ancestral healing is never ending.
True.
But that's what makes it so fun.
You're one of these people. You're in it. You're in it for the long game.
I kind of experience ancestral healing to be like an Easter egg hunt. Like some of those Easter eggs, when you find them, you open it and it's like horror, But it's like it's really powerful information. Even those eggs which I have cracked open that feel like horror, that present difficult conundrums for the soul to deal with, it's still like the amount of power in your hands makes for such a profound and deep relationship with life. So it's almost like, I almost compare the ancestral healing journey to a lot of shamanic work. Anybody who's experienced shamanic medicines will tell you that the down journeys are often the very most profound and often the very most beneficial, even though they're the hardest, right? So it's like you're either finding Easter eggs that contain that or Easter eggs where you open it and you're like, amazing! You're on cloud 9, like bouncing around. And because of that, it's like I don't really see ancestral healing, if you really get into it, at the degree that I have, right? Or that is possible. It's not like you want it to end, because it's just more nuggets of information, more awareness, which leads to just more. It's like, more changes, more benefits, more profound depth, more, it creates this richness that I feel like most people are completely cut off from in today's modern world, especially in, certain races and certain societies.
Yeah. Do you feel the emphasis I'm putting on the descendant part of the equation?
Yeah, I do.
You're also a mother. I imagine there's elements of the work that you do that are impactful for your relationship with your descendants.
I want to stress that every single thing you do impacts your descendants. Everything. Every action, every word, every decision. Everything you heal or don't heal, everything. Yeah, I cannot stress enough how anything you do upstream affects anything downstream, and we could look at it like that when it comes to descendants. Your descendants are essentially downstream from you. So let's say that running through your family line is this pattern of aloofness, and that pattern of aloofness has made it so that, every person who's born into that family doesn't feel emotionally received. At a certain point, you just got to be like, I'm done with this. Okay, I am looking back. I understand that this is something that's been running through the line for X amount of time. I don't want this to be an experience that my son goes through, or that my grandchildren go through, or my great-grandchildren go through. That means the buck needs to stop with me.
Do you feel it happening in your own way?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to. You famously have like a really traumatic upbringing, right?
Yeah, and it's been really hard to understand that, within the framework of anything. It's almost like, one of the major benefits I want people to understand about ancestral healing is that it provides this opportunity to depersonalize things. And to depersonalize things is very powerful because it means that it's less about you. When you don't take things as personally, then it's much easier, especially for certain aspects of your brain, to keep working rather than to go into fight or flight mode. It's easier to step outside of a problem and address the problem. It's actually easier to feel a sense of empowerment about it. It feels like you're part of the picture, not just of the wounding, but also of the healing of something. So, even diving into my past before I really got into this stuff, and properly obsessed with it, I very much felt like my experience within the framework of my entire family line or anybody I knew was kind of like a one-off. And it wasn't until diving into my mother's line, honestly, that I was like, oh, this has just been, a never-ending pattern of tragedies. Ridiculous, senseless tragedies that just keeps pounding through this line. And the sort of dysfunctional ways that each generation copes with those profound tragedies. And that coping amplifying the whole damn thing. So suddenly it was like, okay, this actually is an ancestral thing. It's simply amplified in my life, and it would amplify even worse for my son if I was to continue this. So it puts you more in the power position of like, all right, assuming that this is just a pattern and this pattern keeps continuing, so does the way that you cope with that particular pattern, which is in and of itself another pattern. What different words, actions, and thoughts am I going to exert within the framework of my life so as to make it so that this does not repeat? And it's been so profound, and not just for me, for everybody else in my family line,
Yeah.
I've been properly estranged, honestly, from a lot of my family members. I do not have a close family. My extended family is, on both sides, is fragmented all over the place. There's no grip.
Wow.
And I hated them, to be honest with you. For the vast majority of my life, it was like, I literally hate these people. It's like being born into a reptilian family where there's no real connection or closeness or attachment or pull or anything.
What was there? If there wasn't that, what was there?
Detachment, disengagement, a profound emotional chill, the capacity to disconnect, distraction. It's like on both sides you see, to make this racial, which sometimes we have to do when we're looking, into the picture of our history and genealogy. If we're going to throw out a gross generalization, the white races have been the ones to really create a sense of alienation within the families. It's like the opposite of enmeshment trauma. It's kind of like, you're sort of expected to go do you. No, I'm not really thinking about whether you're going to be here on holidays. That's not expected. I don't even know you. So.
Is it truly the race, or is it the culture or lack of culture?
It's both. So it's like we can generalize about races, but we can even look within the races. You'll see pockets where there would be, say, the presence of a higher degree of closeness, and pockets where it's like, oh, the entire life experience or even, wartime experience has made it so that this culture is just, infected with this way of being, right?
Yeah, and I agree with you. Listen, I live in Southern California. Like the Mexican culture, the families are together. The abuelas are in the house. Like in the parks, the birthday celebrations are massive. You know.
Yep.
And then there's the nuclear family at Chuck E. Cheese with one kid and one birthday hat on, and that's that. There is a stark difference if you want to just be real about it. You know, you can see that culturally.
Yeah, I want to. We need to, if we're going to do ancestral trauma, we need to be able to generalize, even if it's not politically correct.
Exactly. And so are you calling for that? Are you calling for that closeness of family? I mean, as this work has impacted you, do you have a relationship with your mom? Have you done the work? Like,
I have a relationship. The thing is like, all of us have a relationship which we would want with our parents or grandparents or whoever it is. That's not necessarily an accurate picture of the relationship that is possible with someone.
Correct, yeah.
So what I'm doing is a blend of like continuing to be committed to this type of work and understanding her, you know, at the same time as trying to let go of this like deep need for her to be something that she's not going to be and does not want to be, which has been both very difficult, but also very freeing, you know, because I feel like it opens up the space more for what's actually possible. But I definitely, through going through what I have with watching the ancestral patterns as they've played out in terms of the picture of the abuse that I went through, I've developed a much greater level of compassion for my family members, despite the amount of damage that they may have caused me through their complete neglect. And I mean extended family members even more so than immediate, believe it or not. That's what shocked me. It's like to see the origins of some of these things, you know, tragic deaths where people are growing up without parents, you know, things like that. Where if you've never ever seen any of these types of emotional resources displayed, obviously you don't know what to give. And we're living in a really beneficial time right now in this way, which is that in the age of information, we have a lot of resources available to us if we've never experienced something before. You know, the fact that we can even just go to Google or should walk into a library, which by the way is also very new. It's not like, you know, the self-help genre is brand new. It's 1980s really. So everything before then was like, if a person's born and they've got this issue with feeling completely like they don't belong, or they're dealing with gender issues or whatever it is, it's like you didn't have this database to kind of go say, what do I do given that I don't know? It's just everybody's kind of bumbling around, wrecking each other's lives or surprise benefiting them. So, you know, I developed a lot of compassion for the fact that a lot of these people were put in these positions where they tried to cope in the best way they could. They didn't know how to change these patterns. Nobody was there helping them. And it feels very instinctual, like most of it, you know. And it's almost like you get a picture for the fact that everybody's doing the best they can with what they have from where they are. And not only that nobody is the villain of their own story. When I've been doing historical work, that is something that has struck me powerfully, which applies to much more than just, you know, my own personal genealogy. Is just in the picture of history, no man sees themselves as the villain, which means they always have some kind of profound perspective or motive for doing what they're doing. And there's a deep desire to understand that that has been born within me.
Yeah. And so you're right. Maybe we can't control the ideal relationship that we dream of having. It's not possible. And in the work that I do with men, you know, we do a lot of having men stand in to represent that man's father, to have the conversation that you're never going to have. Just honestly, you're never going to have this conversation, so why not have it right here, right now? And this can be so moving. It can be so powerful. So we don't have that control, but one relationship that we do have command of is the one with ourself. Another topic you like, self-love.
I love that topic, yep.
Maybe even the mastery of self-love, if there is such a thing. You know, I'm a big fan of this topic as well. I feel in my life, with the hand I've been dealt, I have a never-ending well. Like I wake up with a full cup, and it feels great. And I'm so grateful to the ancestors for that full cup. And I don't know how it happens.
That's nice.
There's trauma all around me, but I do feel blessed in many ways. What is your journey? What is your self-love journey? What has it been?
Well, my self-love journey actually started when I escaped from all of the abusive past, and it was just the beginning, because everybody sort of has the escape scene. I'm away from the environment. It's like, roll credits. No, it's not actually how it works. So, I got out of the abuse and was like, oh, I'm a hot mess. I don't know how to do life normally. So, part of that was just realizing that I had this whole plethora of behaviors which was really detrimental to me. Whether it was cutting or, hypersexuality, not using any discernment with a desensitization to fear, all kinds of things. So it started to happen where I would go into therapists who were trying to help me with this, it was like Santa's bag level of trauma where you just keep reaching in and it's like, oh, look, you got a whole house in there. Like, what else could be in there? It's its own world. And I kept hearing from people, you just need to love yourself, Teal. You need to learn to love yourself. And it got to the point where I was ready to pull a bazooka out of my jacket and shoot people. I was so mad. I mean, I just can't even explain the level of fury I felt. Because and it's still my fury, by the way, because in the self-help field, I detest abstract concepts. I hate them. Why do I hate them? Because I don't care whether they're objectively true or not if you can't find some way to practically apply them. And it becomes a mask for when people don't actually know what the hell they're talking about. And that's what it was. I'm telling you right now. It was a lot of people who were like, oh, I love the idea of self-love, but I don't know what the hell it is. Which is why when you pin somebody down and say, okay, what does it mean to love yourself? Most people go dead silent. They can't answer you. And so it started to scare me because I was like, all right, I understand that. I get it. I need to treat myself better. I need to love myself better. How? How do you go from hating yourself to liking yourself? How do you go from these horrific behaviors that I've got towards myself to something more beneficial? And the fact that nobody could answer me was terrifying. So I had a little meltdown, and then I had, what happened that usually happens for me when I have a meltdown, which is, all right, I guess it's me then. So I thought, look, I'm on my own here. Like there's not, I've not met anybody who understands what this is. And so I got to figure it out. I want to dive into the concept of love in general. What does that mean if it's applied to the self? And I came up with this idea of studying people who do love themselves, juxtaposed to people who really don't.
Did you do that? Did you actually do a study?
Oh man, it was, of course, it was not like official, but yes, I went crazy. I must have been so obnoxious during those days because it was like, no matter what social setting.
What type of questions would you ask to determine whether someone truly loved themselves or not?
God, it was like a proper interrogation. And anytime I met with somebody who exhibited, these traits, I started to identify traits in people who really did love themselves, right? And anytime I felt like I was in the room with one of those people where, they demonstrate a belief, that was on that spectrum, it was like, all right, you've just entered the freaking courtroom, my friend. And why does that not make you feel like you're betraying everyone around you? And why does that not lead to this? And when did you start to feel that way? I mean, it was an interrogation, right? And what came out of that interrogation was a very clear idea about what self-love was, how to execute self-love, right? And how to get people there. And I started applying these things to myself in a very aggressive way. I love to take my own medicine. If I was a scientist, I'd totally be the one that tests on myself. So I went to town and I was like, this is going to be my commitment.
In a way you are. I have to imagine. All of these thought practices, exercises, modalities, I know that you've done so much of them. So in a way, we all are kind of our own science experiment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So during those years, I went really, 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 really deep, applying all of these concepts to myself. And
what did you find?
It's really hard to go from self-hate to self-love, is what I found.
Can you love the part of yourself that hates yourself? Can that person get some love?
Well, that's where I went.
Okay.
So I do have to say that what shocked me is that we've got this idea, before we understand the concept of resistance or protector parts within this personality spectrum, that are dedicated to preserving, we could call them detrimental behaviors for our own sake. Now, before I really went down this path, like most people, I was thinking, you don't love yourself because you've just been deprived of these things. So I'm thinking, the first time that I ever put love into water, this is one of the exercises I teach people, is to put their hands around a glass of water, and for 2 minutes, they got to set a timer, because the more strong and intense your focus is, the better, and 2 minutes is pretty much the max that most people can maintain until they've really practiced. You focus loving something, whatever you love the very most. It's not really that you're doing self-love. Most people who don't love themselves can't approach love from the attitude of giving it to themselves.
They have to give it to something.
Yeah, something. So let's say that you had this incredible relationship with your grandfather or grandmother. You think about that person, and you think about the way you feel towards them, and you intentionally send that energy into the water. Now, understanding that water is a keeper of memory, it's a very interesting element, because it keeps the memory, and it structurizes differently depending on what focus goes into it. So in this exercise, you then drink the water. Now, I'm thinking, I've been so deprived of self-love, this is it's just giving myself a resource I've never had. Oh, hell no. This is when I start to create, my own little PhD in resistance. Because when I went to drink that water, all of me was like, no, what is going on? So I started to ask these questions and started to see that there's a part within me, that was really maintaining resistance to the self. And so at first, my attitude towards it was like, I've got an internal enemy. That's how most people feel when they've got parts that sabotage them, right? So it's scary. You're like, oh no, sort of feels like you've got this great white shark that's living internally, whose entire modus operandi is to ruin your life, and that goes hand in hand with this incredibly violent self-talk, I'm sitting there holding the water, for example, and the thoughts that are going on in my head are things like, God, you're such a freaking idiot,
Yeah.
And I'm noticing this it's like a chaos, it's like a war.
Because that's what you learned. I have to imagine that's what you learned. If there wasn't this example of love right in front of your eyes, it was this other thing that was telling you the exact opposite. It was telling you all the horrible things.
And I had internalized it all. But I did what I do when I'm in the scientific mode, which is I get very, very curious.
Yes.
And curiosity is something interesting. It's funny because I've never talked about this on an interview before, but I feel like curiosity is an interesting mental state to lean back into, especially when you're in a really resistant state, because we can't really access maybe higher frequency things like approval. But curiosity, most people can in fact access. So I leaned back into the curiosity for myself and started to really want to understand these aspects of myself that I identified as these internal enemies. And I started to notice a trend when I worked with them directly, which, now I've got whole teachings around because I've never encountered anything else, which is that these aspects of self which are against you, right, are not really against you at all. And that was a revolutionary concept, the idea that self-hate can in fact be a way of protecting yourself. And when I realized how that was working within my own system, it was one of those eureka moments. If I had written a thesis, I would have thrown it over the balconies. I did it! I cracked a theory! You guys! I was freaking out, because, it transformed everything. It transformed everything in terms of the way that I dealt with myself. It transformed that feeling that I had, there was no more internal enemy. There was just parts of me that I didn't understand enough to do the right thing with.
And the curiosity was how is this serving me? How is this serving me?
Exactly.
That's a great question for us to ask.
But I started even without that. Because even that's an advanced thought.
Okay.
Even that is to walk into something with an assumption.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was like I didn't even want to assume that it was for me. I was open to it being like, yeah, I want you to die. I literally, like, I almost wanted it to be so open that I had no assumption or projection that it was, for or against or anything. Lo and behold, why are you doing this? Because if I don't, this happens. Oh, there you are. You are for me. But yes, now we can safely say, but I want people to figure this out for themselves, we can safely say that there's no such thing as a part internally that is against you.